Okay, so now I would like to pass to the next speaker, Dr. Richard Twidman, who is one of the Work Package leaders and the dissemination and communication manager of the InnCoCells project. So Dr. Twinman is going to give us a presentation of the InnCoCells project objectives and activities. Richard, are you listening to us? Are you here?
I'm here, Kostas.
That is great.
How do I control the slides?
You can say this, you know. So, do you prefer to share it yourself? Otherwise, I can share. And you can just tell me next slide, something
Yeah,
like that.
that's fine.
It's up to you.
I'll say next slide. That's fine. That's great.
Okay, okay. So the floor is yours. Thank
Thank you
you.
very much, Kostas. So, good morning, everybody. My name's Richard Twyman. I am representing the InnCoCells project, which is innovative, high-value cosmetic products from plants and plant cells. And it's the only one of the 4 projects in the cluster which is dedicated to terrestrial resources. But I hope we can still find some common areas to pursue together. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through the background of the project, some of the challenges we face and how we're going to address them. I'll list the objectives and some facts and figures about the project, and then introduce the partners, discuss the concept underlying the project, and then look at the work packages and the work going on in each of those. Next slide, please. So the premise of the project is that biotechnology can be used to exploit plants in a sustainable manner to make cosmetic ingredients that meet consumer demands. And as you can see here, consumers are driven by quality, which translates roughly in this context to efficacy, and also by sustainability, even more than cost, i.e., consumers are willing to pay more for a product that works and that does not harm the environment. We know that plants make thousands of bioactive secondary metabolites, which we call natural products, and many of these are suitable as cosmetic ingredients. However, what we don't want to do is rampage through the environment to source these plants, destroying fragile ecosystems in the process. And nor do we want to trample on the rights of countries and their populations with regard to natural resources. So the idea is to find plants that are not restricted by the Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing, and that produce natural cosmetic ingredients. And then we aim to cultivate them, cell cultures or organ cultures or whole plants, and define the conditions which maximize the yield of the products we're seeking. And we're not only considering living plants, but also waste products from agro-industrial waste streams, which are also rich in bioactive compounds. Next slide, please. So as part of the proposal stage, we had to identify the limitations and challenges that need to be addressed. And in a nutshell, we distilled this down to 3 categories: technical, economical, and commercial. The technical bottlenecks are based on the classic struggle between plant growth and productivity. So the allocation of resources to growth and increasing biomass, or to the production of secondary metabolites. And so we're aiming to find the conditions that maximize growth and productivity, so we can ensure that the ingredients we're seeking can be produced in an economically feasible manner. And we've got several academic partners in the consortium addressing this issue directly. Then the economic bottleneck is whether these sustainable technologies can be deployed in a economically feasible process. And again, luckily, we've got several commercial partners, SMEs in the project, who are very experienced in this area, and they've already developed a number of products on the market. So their expertise and experience is invaluable in that regard. And then finally, the other bottleneck was consumer satisfaction, which depends, as I said, on efficacy. And both our academic and commercial partners, including our big industry partner, Merck, have established numerous in vitro and cell-based assays to test the functionalities of these ingredients and also test on human volunteers. Next slide, please. So the main objectives of the project I've spread over 2 slides. First, we want to mine plant resources to identify at least 10 pathways that give rise to useful ingredients, and while respecting, as I said, the Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing. And then we want to develop what we've called a multi-step evaluation process that I'll describe in more detail shortly. And ultimately, the aim is to produce 50 active ingredients with scientifically verified properties. For 20 of those, we want to get to the stage of having an optimized production process in one of our major platforms. That's either cell or organ cultures or aeroponic facilities or whole plants growing in the greenhouse or field. And we also want to look at least 10 agro-industrial waste streams as sources of additional ingredients. And the aim here is to develop a cascade biorefinery approach. So we want to extract the waste products multiple times and get the most value from it. And even the stuff that's left, we want to use for energy recovery or animal feed, so that the whole process is completely energy neutral. And each stage, we want to narrow down the number of products, but by the end of the project, we want at least 10 fully characterized ingredients with a pilot scale full process from cultivation to extraction, and these will be the ones we take through to the pre-commercial stage. These ingredients will be tested for safety in assays and also for sustainability with life cycle assessment, and also for economic feasibility by techno-economic analysis. And finally, we want to promote knowledge exchange in the project, which is part of the advantage of being in the AIMS cluster with the other projects. We want to protect our IP, obviously, and establish a stakeholder group to guide the project, and finally, to develop effective dissemination and communication strategy. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of our project in numbers. I won't read it out, but I would draw your attention to the description of the consortium, because I'm going to briefly introduce now the partners and describe their roles. Next slide, please. So as you can see here, we have 17 partners from 11 countries in Europe, and the partners can be divided into 3 broad categories. We've got research organisations, stroke universities in blue. In yellow. We have SMEs, which and industry partners, which is shown in blue, and we've got other, which are other organisations in green. And there's a nice balance here between our academic and industry representation in the project, which is pretty important given the work spans the value chain and the multiple technology readiness levels, as I'll explain in a few moments. Next slide, please. So what we've got here, we've got the 6 RTO stroke university partners shown up at the top left, and they all have extensive and well-documented expertise in plant biotechnology, but also, which is very important, unique complementary sets of skills and competencies and access to different resources and infrastructure. Then we have 7 SMEs that focus on natural products, shown top right. And in some cases, these also have a biotechnological component, which fits in nicely with the objectives of the project. And the 8th SME is my company, which focuses on project dissemination and communication activities. Then we have 1 large industry partner, Merck, which is providing expertise in the testing of bioactive extracts and compounds. And then bottom left, we've got EPSO, which is an academic organisation that works to increase the impact and visibility of plant science in Europe. And one of its key functions here is the overseeing the stakeholder group, which I'll mention briefly later. And Cosmetic Valley is a sectorial association that networks with more than 3,000 cosmetic and perfume companies. And this is also useful for the reach of the project and ultimately the commercialization of the products we're developing. Okay, next slide, please. So here is the core overall concept of the project. And basically, the plants we wish to exploit have to be optimized in terms of cultivation. And this can mean cell cultures, it can mean hairy root, or cultures, or whole plants grown in aeroponic conditions or in the greenhouse or in the field. And then they have to be optimized in terms of production, so we maximize the accumulation of the cosmetic ingredients we're seeking. And then we have to optimize them in terms of recovery so that we can maximize the yield of the pure product. So to increase the chances of success in the project, we have two concurrent strategies. And the first one is to select a large panel of plants for initial upstream development. And this is what we mean here by category A. So we have sort of a bioprospecting work package, which I'll discuss in a minute, which also involves some engineering. And via this, we have settled on about 50 species, which we are developing for upstream production. The second strategy to maximize the chances of success in the project is to introduce some plants which are already past the upstream development stage. So we can launch them straight into the optimization of production, as shown in the blue grid there. And they are known as category B plants. And still others have already completed that stage. And so we already have productive large-scale cultures. And here we are introducing these directly into the recovery activity. And these are called category C. The category C work also includes the aforementioned agro-industrial waste streams. So here we are, obviously we don't need to cultivate that, we've got the raw material already, and we're just going to use that to recover other ingredients. So combining these two strategies, the bioprospecting of many different species for development from the ground up, plus the introduction of some species which have already passed through these stages, we aim to achieve the objectives set out earlier in the project. And then the recovered ingredients are set out, they're tested for their bioactivity and their safety, and they are subjected to life cycle assessment and techno-economic analysis. And the ones which pass all these stages will be looked at in the context of regulatory affairs. And the aim is to select the ingredients, hopefully at least 10 of them, to make it through to that stage. Next slide, please. So the concept of the project, which I've just described, maps fairly neatly onto the work package organization. So we have top left work package 1, and that deals with the bioprospecting and engineering concepts of the project. And the aim here is to deliver whole plants or cells or organs which have passed this initial bioprospecting stage for upstream development in WP2, which will in turn feed into WP3, which is process development, and WP4, which is the ingredient recovery. So there'll be some plants which start directly in WP1, WP2. That's the category A plants that I mentioned on the previous slide. Whereas others will go directly to WP3, which is the category B plants that have already been optimized in terms of upstream production and just need scaling up. And finally, there'll be some plants which go straight to WP4, that's the category C plants, and also the agro-industrial waste streams will go straight into WP4. So once the ingredients have been recovered, they are tested in WP5, and that involves both the testing of components, as in the analytics to discover what specific compounds we're dealing with, plus the safety and bioactivity assays, which will define which ingredients can be taken forward to further to pre-commercialization. Then we have WP6, which is specifically for those commercialization aspects. So this will cover the life cycle assessment, the techno-economic analysis, and the regulatory affairs, everything to do with commercialization, basically, including a set of customer surveys to assess consumer preferences, which will guide the if we need to make a selection of which ingredients we're taking forward. That will be the way we do so. Then we have work package 7, which is for intellectual property, exploitation, dissemination, and communication, and also for the establishment and management of the stakeholder group. And then WP8 for management and WP9 for ethics, which was a mandatory work package added by the EC after the project had been funded. So I'm going to spend what we've got left, about 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. I'm going to spend the rest of the time briefly summarizing each of the main work packages and the results that have been achieved so far. So here is work package 1. And as you can see, it's divided into 2 main components. We've got bioprospecting on the left and strain engineering on the right. As I said earlier, we've considered a large number of species and have selected about 50 to take forward. The criteria for selection include that they must be on the EU cosmetic ingredient database, which is called COSIN, and also it must be part of the IECIC list. That's the inventory of existing cosmetic ingredients in China. And the reason for this is because companies generally don't invest in ingredients that aren't accepted by the Chinese market because it's large and very lucrative. So we've placed these constraints on our selection in order that we can access the global market. Then the selected plant species will be cultivated, and the best way to cultivate them will be established, and then they'll be passed on to WP2 for optimization. On the right, the other component is the engineering. And here, what we're doing is using a range of synthetic biology and omics technology to optimize the growth and product yield of tomato as a model system. And as well as identifying the products and pathways suitable for exploitation using tomato, one of the deliverables from this work package is a suite of engineering tools, a toolkit that can be used by the broader scientific community to facilitate further research. Next slide, please. So the species selected from WP1 will be optimized in the laboratory, and so WP2 will generate a series of laboratory scale processes that will involve selecting the best cultivation format from our range, which includes cell cultures with and without illumination, hairy roots, aeroponic cultivation, and the growth of whole plants. And the important thing here is that the use of different forms of illumination in photobioreactors, such as those shown on the right, can help to optimize growth and productivity. So like I said, we want to generate a lot of biomass and also a high yield to the products we're seeking. And another important aspect of WP2 is the cryostorage task, which is necessary so we can have a cell and germplasm bank of our improved plant and plant cell lines. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide, please. So the problem with these laboratory scale processes is that the growth and productivity of the plants and plant cells often cannot be translated directly to a larger scale for industrial deployment. So the purpose of WP3 is to take the laboratory scale processes and define the conditions that replicate their productivity, but doing so at larger scales. So one example would be cell cultures, where in a small bioreactor, it's fairly easy to supply the cells with nutrients and oxygen. But then if you want to scale up to 100 litres or 500 litres, it's not quite as straightforward because the volume and surface area scale at different rates, and there are larger distances for nutrients and oxygen to diffuse. So the devices have different physical and hydrodynamic characteristics too. So all these things can be overcome by appropriate modifications to the process, but the best parameters for scaling up each process must be determined empirically. So this is what WP3 will do. And as I said before, as well as scaling up the systems from the earlier work packages, we also have some category B plants which are already past this stage, will be directed directly into WP3. Next slide, please. Okay, there's a lot going on in WP4, but the main program is a suite of different extraction and isolation methods, and they'll be applied systematically to see which achieves the best recovery of bioactive ingredients while preserving their activity. So what we're going to do is look at various pre-treatment strategies to get the biomass in the best state for efficient product extraction. So that means removing moisture, reducing the particle size, maybe applying enzymes to release products that are trapped inside the plant cells. And then the extraction methods will be tailored to the types of raw material and the chemical nature of the target. The objective is to develop methods that work with industrial quantities of biomass. Like I said earlier, some materials will skip the earlier work packages, category C, and come straight into this work package for extraction. This will include the agro-industrial waste products and which will be introduced as an alternative raw material here. And then finally, an important aspect of this work package is stabilization extracts to ensure that we don't lose the bioactivity of the extracts we produce. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So WP5 is where we analyze the extracts to determine which metabolites are present. And here we benefit from a really hugely diverse range of analytical infrastructure from the partners, including various forms of targeted and untargeted metabolomics, analysis based on chromatography, mass spectrometry, and NMR spectroscopy. And this is very important because it feeds into the other component of work package 5, which is the assessment of efficacy and safety, because it means that the results from these tests can be then correlated with specific metabolites which are present in the extracts. So the partners here have a really diverse panel of assays available to test a huge range of different properties of the extracts, including things like antioxidant and antimicrobial activity, safety testing, which includes mutagenicity, phototoxicity, genotoxicity, and cytotoxicity. We have anti-aging testing. We have anti and pro-inflammatory tests. We have tests for pigmentation and for effects on the skin microbiome. And these tests include in vitro assays, tests in cell lines. We've got quite a sophisticated range of 3D skin models. And finally, also tests on human volunteers. Next slide, please. So the outcome of these, what we'll call the research work packages 1 to 5, as I said earlier, is going to be hopefully up to 10 ingredients that are safe and efficacious, but also that can be produced in a sustainable and economically feasible manner on a large scale, with the whole process developed from cultivation through to extraction. So while the work package 5 will aim to demonstrate the safety and efficacy of the products, it falls to WP6 to look at the sustainability and economics. So 2 of the 3 main components of this work package are therefore the life cycle assessment of at least 3 products. And preferably, we want to test products which have been developed using different cultivation and extraction technologies to get the maximum value, covering all the different technologies we've used, rather than applying life cycle assessment to the same range of technologies. And then we also are including the techno-economic analysis of these processes in this work package. The final component is the regulatory documentation, which also includes the consumer surveys that I mentioned earlier to gauge consumer expectations. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. Finally, work package 7. That's I'm the leader of that work package, and there were 4 main activities here. There's stakeholder engagement, intellectual property exploitation, dissemination and communication. The stakeholder group is a panel of 16 agencies, mainly industrial representatives from the cosmetic industry, but also some from agriculture, some from academia, and one representative of end users. And their role is to provide an external perspective to guide the project. Exploitation and commercial development are led by Professor Frederick Borgard, who is here and will be discussing the common standard later in today's meeting. And then we have the dissemination and communication activities, which are my responsibility, and I'll be proposing some joint activities among the 4 projects later. Next slide, please. So that's the end of the presentation. I'd just like to say these are the main contact points for the consortium. You're very welcome to get in touch with us for any questions, proposals for joint activities or anything else. And next slide, please.